They called it the Great Depression, but for the people who lived it, it was just life. Between 1929 and 1933, the American economy shrank by nearly a third. 1 in 4 workers had no job. Banks failed. Savings vanished. Families who lost everything lined up for bread. And yet, not everyone was ruined. In this video, we'll uncover the lessons they left behind. 7 timeless truths about money, resilience, and how to live well when the world falls apart. Lesson number 1. Live below your means. When the Great Depression hit, the Miller family of Detroit had no savings. Only bills, a mortgage, and a dream that hard work at the Ford plant would always be enough. Then, one gray morning in 1931, Mr. Miller was handed a small white envelope, a pink slip folded inside. Overnight, their steady $35 a week income vanished. He wasn't alone. Across the country, factories went silent, paychecks stopped, and the cost of living collapsed. Newspapers captured the new reality in bold type. In a world where money was scarce, the few who held cash held power. At first, the Millers waited for things to turn around. They borrowed a little. Then they sold what they could: his watch, her wedding china, the children's unused school coats. By spring, they realized no rescue was coming. That's when Mrs. Miller took control. She planted vegetables in the empty yard. She cut old dresses into smaller ones for her daughters. The family mended clothes by candlelight and traded bread for milk with their neighbors. For 2 years, they lived on almost nothing, yet they kept their house when others lost theirs. Their secret wasn't luck, it was restraint. Every penny was watched, every meal stretched, every want postponed. When the economy finally began to stir again, the Millers had something few others did: stability. They had learned to live on less than they earned, and when income returned, that habit stayed. But for every family like the Millers who held on, countless others didn't. As factories closed and savings vanished, unemployment climbed from 8% to nearly 25% in just 4 years. The worst labor collapse in American history. Lesson number 2. Cash is king in deflation. Eleanor Brooks taught arithmetic in a one-room schoolhouse outside Topeka. Her pay was modest and $25 a month, but she had one habit her colleagues teased her for. She saved nearly every dime. When the banks began to fail, she withdrew her savings, $300 in cash, and hid it in a brown envelope, tucked behind a loose board under the floor. That decision would change her life. By 1932, prices had fallen by a third. A family cow that once sold for $50 now fetched $20. Farmhouses stood abandoned, mortgages unpaid. During deflation, when prices collapse and credit vanishes, debt is a trap, but cash is a lifeline. Those who held it could buy land, stocks, or homes for a fraction of their former cost. Eleanor watched neighbors lose everything, not because they were lazy or foolish, but because credit had dried up and no one had cash to buy. Then one evening, a widowed farmer came to her door. His wife had passed, his fields were bare, and he could no longer keep his land. He offered to sell her his small homestead, 10 acres, house and barn, for just $200. Eleanor opened that brown envelope and counted out the bills she'd saved over years of quiet discipline. When the dust settled, she owned land outright, while others owed money on fields they could no longer plant. Eleanor's story reminds us, cash isn't just money, it's opportunity. Holding cash isn't about fear, it's about optionality, the power to act when others can't. In the 1930s, it meant survival. For Eleanor, it meant ownership. Lesson number 3, avoid debt like the plague. Tom Jenkins was a proud farmer outside Enid, Oklahoma, In 1928, wheat was booming, 30 cents a bushel and climbing. Banks were eager, handing out loans for new tractors and silos. Tom signed his name for $1,000 in credit, sure next year's harvest would cover it. But 1930 came with drought. The wind howled across the plains, stripping the topsoil bare. Wheat prices plunged below 10 cents. Every load he hauled to market barely paid the fuel. Each month the bank's notice arrived. Same payment, smaller income. By 1932, Tom was selling furniture just to keep up. Finally, the sheriff came with the foreclosure papers. He watched strangers bid on the very tractor he'd borrowed to buy. Down the road, his neighbor Earl, who refused every loan offer, still farmed the old way with mules and muscle. He earned little, but he lost nothing. Tom's debt had bought him 1 good year and 10 bad ones. Earl's caution bought him a lifetime of ownership. The Great Depression proved that families who owed nothing could adapt. Those who owed everything lost it all. As prices and incomes collapsed, debts did not. Between 1929 and 1933, the real burden of every $100 in debt grew to $133. While prices fell 25%, incomes dropped more than 30%, and the money supply shrank by over 1/3. Farmers like Tom weren't just fighting drought. They were trapped in what economists later called the debt deflation spiral. In the late 1920s, stock prices soared, and so did borrowing. Investors didn't just buy stocks with savings. They bought on margin, using debt to amplify gains. By 1929, broker loans reached nearly $9 billion, almost matching the entire value of the stock market itself. But when prices fell, that borrowed money turned deadly. Margin calls forced investors to sell at any price, driving the market down even faster. What had been easy money on the way up became impossible debt on the way down. But even in the ruins of debt and deflation, some found new ways to survive. Not through banks or markets, but through their own hands. Lesson number 4. Diversify income streams. By 1933, the crisis had shifted from farms to factories. Cities like Chicago were filled with silent mills and shuttered plants. The heartbeat of industry gone quiet. But for some, survival meant turning skill into salvation. Clara Rodriguez had spent 10 years bent over a sewing machine in the Lincoln textile mill. She wasn't rich, but the rhythm of the needle was steady work. Until the orders stopped. One winter morning, the supervisor gathered the women and said softly, "Factory's shutting down. Maybe for good." Clara walked home through the snow with her final pay envelope. $18 and no promise of more. Rent was due, coal was low, and lines for soup kitchens wrapped around the block. But Clara still had her hands, and a needle that would become her lifeline, and her lesson for a nation learning to rebuild. She hung a sign in her window, repairs and alterations. At first, it was a button for a neighbor, payment in bread, then a hem for a teacher, payment in coal. Soon, a wedding dress for a young bride whose family had lost everything, payment in a warm meal, and $5. By spring, Clara's small room buzzed with needles and laughter. What began as survival became her business. When the mills finally reopened, she didn't go back. She no longer needed to. Clara shows us that security comes not from one income, but from many skills. In the Great Depression, millions waited for jobs to return that never did. Those who adapted, the gardeners, the fixers, the makers, found value when money disappeared. Lesson number 5. Gold and hard assets outlast paper money. On a quiet spring morning in 1933, Samuel Goldman unlocked the doors to his family's small jewelry shop on 47th Street. For 30 years, he'd traded in wedding bands, pocket watches, and silver spoons. That week, a new law had shaken the city. President Roosevelt's executive order demanded citizens surrender their gold to the Federal Reserve, coins, bars, even certain jewelry, in exchange for paper dollars. Rumors swirled that the government would soon change the price of gold itself. Customers rushed in, desperate to sell before the deadline. Samuel bought what he could, paying in cash from a safe he'd quietly filled over the years. He couldn't have known that within months the U.S. would devalue the dollar, raising the price of gold from $20.67 to $35 an ounce. Overnight, every ounce he'd kept became worth nearly 70% more in paper terms. To the Goldmans, gold wasn't speculation. It was preservation. The habit of holding something real when the rules of money change. In the 1930s, savers who trusted the dollar saw its value shift by decree. Those who held tangible assets, land, metals, tools, saw their worth endure. Lesson number 6, community is better than isolation. By the winter of 1931, the Johnson family's pantry was almost empty. Harold Johnson, once a proud machinist, hadn't worked in a year. His wife, Ruth, rationed flour by the cup, keeping a notebook to stretch every pound. One evening, their neighbor, Mrs. Keller, knocked on the door, holding a half sack of beans. "I'll trade you for a little firewood," she said. That night, something shifted. The next day, the bakers down the road brought milk. The millers offered potatoes. That night, they learned what the Depression could never take away: the power of neighbors who refused to let each other fall. By the end of the week, the old barn at the edge of town had become a community kitchen. Every evening, neighbors gathered, one with carrots, another with bread. They cooked together, laughed together, survived together. No one had enough alone, but together they had plenty. "The bank took our savings, but it couldn't take our neighbors," Mrs. Johnson told this reporter, stirring a pot of communal stew in the barn that has become the village's lifeline. The Johnsons and their neighbors learned a truth modern wealth often forgets. Security isn't built in isolation. It's built in community. During the Great Depression, those who shared endured. Money could disappear overnight, but trust, kindness, and skill never lost their value. In the end, the richest currency was community itself. That was the real safety net no bank could build. Lesson number 7. Speculation is not investing. Edward Collins was 24 when the fever hit Wall Street. Everywhere he turned, someone was getting rich. The grocer, the tailor, even his landlord. It seemed as if stocks only went one way, up. He'd saved $200, a small fortune for a clerk. But the broker said, "Why stop there? You can buy on margin. Put down 10% and own 10 times more. Just sign here." Edward signed the papers, trembling with excitement. On paper, he was worth thousands. Then came October 1929. Just days before, the papers spoke of endless prosperity. But by Thursday, Wall Street was drowning. The ticker tape spilling like a flood of numbers and fear. The numbers on the ticker tape began to fall, slowly, then all at once. In a single week, the market lost nearly half its value. By the time Edward rushed to sell, his account was wiped out. Not just his savings, but everything he owed the broker too. Brokers' phones rang endlessly. Margin calls, one after another. Deposit more funds, they demanded, or lose everything. But there was nothing left to give. Most people simply couldn't pay. The dream of easy riches had become a nightmare. In a single week, the promise of fortune turned into ruin, not just for Edward, but for millions. For years afterward, Edward lived simply. He never speculated again. Instead, he bought what he understood, steady, dividend-paying stocks, and kept a little cash aside. He never became rich, but he never went broke again either. After the crash, Edward finally understood one of the hardest lessons in investing: to put his money only in what he truly understood. He realized that steady, familiar investments will always outlast the lure of sudden riches. Edward's story echoes through every boom and bust. Speculation is not investing. In 1929, millions bought stocks not for ownership, but for excitement, chasing the greater fool who'd pay more tomorrow. When the music stopped, only the patient investors, those who valued cash flow over hype, survived. True investing is dull. It's built on time, patience, and understanding, not thrill or leverage. The Great Depression didn't just destroy wealth, it exposed the difference between fortune and foundation. The legacy of the Great Depression. When the Great Depression ended, America didn't return to the same world. Neither did the people who lived through it. They emerged quieter, humbler, wiser. They no longer measured wealth by what they owned, but by what they could endure. Those who adapted, endured. And from their stories, we still learn the oldest truth of wealth. It's not what you have, but how you live when you have less. Today, our world feels different, faster, louder, richer. But the fundamentals never change. Money obeys the same laws it did a century ago. Save before you spend. Own before you owe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.